The world never taught you this lesson directly. It whispered, through betrayal, through silence, through moments where doing the right thing somehow led to the worst outcome. We are raised on a comforting lie that goodness protects us, that honesty is rewarded, that morality is a shield against harm, and for a time this illusion feels real, because believing it makes the world feel safer, more predictable, more just. But history tells a colder story. Empires were not built by the most virtuous, revolutions were not led by the most honest, and power has rarely belonged to the most moral. Instead, power has always gravitated toward those who understood how people actually behave, not how they claim they should. This is where discomfort begins, because once you notice this pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee it. The coworker who manipulates quietly rises faster than the hardest worker. The public figure caught lying is forgiven, while the one who speaks inconvenient truths is erased. The kind-hearted are often used, not protected, and slowly a dangerous question forms in the mind. If morality alone were enough, why does the world look like this? This is not cynicism, it is an observation. Across centuries, civilizations rise and collapse following the same psychological rules. Different flags, different languages, same patterns. The powerful understand perception. The powerless cling to principle, hoping it will save them. And sometimes it does, but often it doesn't. This is where Machiavelli enters the story, not as a monster, not as a corrupter of souls, but as a man who made people uncomfortable by refusing to lie about human nature. Machiavelli did not invent cruelty. He simply described it. He did not encourage manipulation. He explained why it works, and for that history labeled him dangerous. Because Machiavelli committed the ultimate sin, he chose reality over comfort. In The Prince, he wrote about rulers not as saints, but as strategists. He spoke of morality not as an absolute force, but as a variable, one that bends under pressure. He observed that people praise virtue, but follow strength, that they admire goodness, but obey power, and perhaps most unsettling of all, he noticed that the world punishes innocence far more consistently than it punishes ruthlessness. This is not an invitation to abandon ethics. It is a warning about naivety, because the most vulnerable position in any system is not immorality, it is unawareness. Think about it. Those who understand manipulation can choose not to use it, but those who don't understand it are always at its mercy. This is the quiet tragedy of idealism. Not that it exists, but that it often refuses to see what stands in front of it. You don't have to look far to find examples. Political movements driven by moral outrage collapse once they meet strategic opposition. Truthful individuals are silenced by those willing to distort narratives. History books celebrate heroes, but footnotes reveal how many were betrayed by the very principles they trusted to protect them. And this creates a psychological fracture. On one side, innocence. On the other, awareness. Most people stand frozen between the two, sensing that something is wrong, but unable to articulate it without feeling guilty. Because acknowledging reality feels like betrayal of values, of hope, of self-image. But here is the truth no one says out loud. Understanding power does not make you evil. Refusing to understand it makes you vulnerable. Machiavelli never argued that people should be ruthless. He argued that the world already is. And once you accept that, a transformation begins. You stop asking why the world isn't fair, and start asking how it actually works. This documentary is not about becoming heartless. It is about becoming mentally armed, not to dominate others, but to avoid being dominated, not to manipulate, but to recognize manipulation when it appears, not to abandon morality, but to stop using it as your only defense, because morality without strategy is fragile, and power without understanding is chaos. So the question is no longer whether the world is unfair. That much is obvious. The real question is far more unsettling. If morality does not stop power, then what does? Lesson is appear weak. When you are strong, power rarely announces itself with confidence. It whispers, it waits, and when it finally moves, it's already too late to stop. History's greatest strategists understood a paradox that most people never do. The moment power becomes visible, it becomes a target. Machiavelli observed this centuries ago, not from theory, but from watching rulers rise and fall. Kings who flaunted their dominance invited rebellion. Leaders who displayed certainty provoked conspiracies. Those who made their strength obvious awakened the oldest human instinct of all, the urge to challenge what stands above us. Because dominance triggers fear, and fear breeds resistance. Psychologists call this threat perception. When people sense overwhelming strength in another, their nervous system reacts defensively. Suspicion grows, and eventually sabotage follows, not always openly, often quietly, strategically, patiently. This is why societies instinctively turn on those who appear too powerful. The tallest figure attracts the first arrow, but the most effective players in history learned something unsettling. Appearing weaker than you are is not deception. It is insulation. Consider the rulers who survived the longest, the advisors who influenced empires, the generals who won wars without fighting them. They were rarely the loudest in the room. Often they appeared unremarkable, humble, even forgettable. Because when people underestimate you, they relax. And when they relax, they reveal themselves. Machiavelli warned that visible strength invites enemies faster than visible weakness invites contempt. A weak man is ignored. A strong man is challenged. But the man who appears weak while quietly holding power controls the tempo of the game. This is not cowardice. It is timing. Modern psychology confirms what Machiavelli saw intuitively. Studies on social dominance show that individuals who signal excessive competence or intelligence early in social hierarchies are often met with resistance, not admiration. Their peers feel threatened. Their motives are questioned. Their mistakes are magnified. In contrast, those who reveal capability gradually are perceived as trustworthy, non-threatening, and later indispensable. This pattern repeats everywhere. In corporate hierarchies, the employee who showcases every skill in the first month often finds themselves isolated, seen as arrogant, competitive, dangerous. Meanwhile, the quieter colleague, the one who listens, observes, and speaks selectively, gathers information, builds alliances, and rises without friction. On social media, the loudest intellectuals gain attention and enemies. Every opinion becomes ammunition. Every certainty invites attack. But those who ask questions instead of making declarations, they shape conversations without becoming targets. Even intelligence itself, when overexposed, becomes a liability. Machiavelli understood that predictability is weakness. When people know exactly how capable you are, they adjust, they prepare, they counter. But when your full strength remains hidden, others miscalculate. And miscalculation is the birthplace of advantage. This does not mean playing dumb. It means playing patient. True power is not about dominance. It is about control of perception. Think of the chessboard. The queen is the most powerful piece, yet exposing her too early invites capture. Skilled players develop quietly. They sacrifice appearances. They let others feel confident until confidence becomes complacency. The world works the same way. Those who constantly signal their strength, wealth, intelligence, morality, influence, invite challenge. But those who move subtly shape outcomes without ever being noticed. And this is where the lesson becomes uncomfortable, because we are taught the opposite. We are told to show our worth, to stand out, to assert ourselves. But Machiavelli would argue that assertion is the language of insecurity. Those who truly hold power have no need to display it. The most dangerous people are not the ones demanding attention. They are the ones collecting information while others perform. They listen when others speak. They wait while others rush. They appear small until the moment they act, and by then, resistance is impossible. So remember this: in a world obsessed with visibility, invisibility is leverage. In a culture addicted to performance, restraint is power. Because the most dangerous people in history were never the loudest. They were the ones you never saw coming. Lesson RA: control the narrative, or be controlled by it. History is not written by the truthful. It is written by the believable. Empires did not rise because they told the truth. They rose because they told the right story. This is the second ruthless lesson Machiavelli understood long before newspapers, television, or algorithms ever existed. Reality is not what happens. It is what people believe happened. Truth on its own is fragile. Belief is armored. In ancient Rome, victories were celebrated even when battles were barely won. Defeats were renamed as strategic withdrawals. Coins, statues, and public rituals were not art, they were narrative weapons. Whoever controlled the story controlled the crowd. Machiavelli watched this carefully. He noticed that rulers who lost control of perception rarely lost power all at once. Instead, their image eroded first. Rumors spread, doubt crept in, loyalty thinned. And by the time the truth mattered, it was already too late. Because once a narrative hardens, facts bounce off it like rain on stone. Fast forward to the modern world, and nothing has changed except the speed. Today, narratives move faster than thought. Public opinion is shaped in headlines, thumbnails, and 15-second clips. Context disappears, emotion dominates. And whoever frames the first version of the story often wins, even if it's wrong. This is psychological framing. Machiavelli understood that people do not analyze information deeply. They respond to signals, to confidence, to repetition, to familiarity. A statement heard often enough begins to feel true, regardless of evidence. Modern public relations is built on this exact insight. PR doesn't ask, "Is this true?" It asks, "Will this stick?" Political spin follows the same rule. When a scandal breaks, the goal is not to prove innocence. It's to define the narrative before someone else does, to label critics as extremists, to reframe failure as intention, to turn questions into attacks. Because silence, when mishandled, is not neutrality, it is surrender. If you do not speak for yourself, others will speak about you, and they will not be kind. Machiavelli warned that those who rely solely on truth assume a fair audience, and there is no such thing. Crowds are emotional. They want coherence, not complexity. A villain is easier to digest than a nuanced human being. So people who fail to shape their own narrative are often cast into roles they never chose: the fool, the threat, the scapegoat. And once a role is assigned, escaping it is nearly impossible. This is why reputations are engineered, not discovered. Think about public figures whose entire identities collapse overnight. Rarely because of a single action, but because a story took hold. And once that story spread, Every past behavior was reinterpreted through it. Neutral actions become suspicious, silence becomes guilt, defense becomes proof. The same applies on a smaller scale. In workplaces, the person who never clarifies their intentions is labeled unmotivated or arrogant. In social circles, the one who doesn't explain themselves becomes cold or untrustworthy, not because it's true, but because humans hate ambiguity and will fill gaps with assumptions, and assumptions are rarely generous. This is where Machiavelli becomes uncomfortable again. He did not argue for dishonesty. He argued for timing. Honesty, revealed at the wrong moment, can destroy you. Silence, used strategically, can protect you. Sometimes the most powerful response is not explanation, but absence. Letting accusations burn themselves out. Letting narratives collapse under their own weight. Because engaging too early gives legitimacy to weak attacks. Other times, silence is fatal. The difference lies in awareness. Those who understand narrative dynamics choose when to speak, how to frame, and what to leave unsaid. Those who don't are dragged into stories written by others. Modern algorithms amplify this mercilessly. Outrage spreads faster than nuance. Simplicity beats accuracy, and once a version of you is indexed, archived, and shared, it becomes difficult to erase. This is not paranoia, it is the architecture of perception. Machiavelli's insight echoes louder than ever. People judge more by appearances than by reality, because appearances are easier to process, which leads to a final, unsettling realization. You are always being interpreted, always being framed, always being placed into a story, whether you like it or not. And if you refuse to define yourself, the world will gladly do it for you. Lesson 7's emotional people are easy to control. Every great manipulation begins the same way. Not with force, not with violence, but with emotion, fear, anger, hope, outrage. These are not weaknesses by accident. They are entry points. Machiavelli understood something that still unsettles us today. The fastest way to control a person is not to overpower their body, but to hijack their emotional state. Because when emotion rises, reason retreats. And when reason retreats, control changes hands. This is not an opinion, it is biology. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient philosophers observed intuitively. When fear or anger is triggered, the brain shifts power away from the prefrontal cortex, the center of logic and planning, and hands control to older, survival-driven systems. In that state, humans don't think. They react, and reaction is predictable. This is why emotional people are easy to guide, easy to provoke, and easy to weaponize, even against themselves. Stoic philosophers warned about this long before MRI scanners existed. They argued that the person ruled by passion is not free. They are possessed. Marcus Aurelius wrote that if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and that estimate is within your control. Machiavelli reached the same conclusion from a darker angle. He saw crowds turn violent not because they were evil, but because they were emotionally inflamed. He watched rulers fall not because they were weak, but because they reacted instead of calculated. History is filled with examples. Revolutions that began with righteous anger ended in tyranny. Movements fueled by moral outrage were redirected by opportunists who knew how to keep emotions burning just long enough to seize power. Cult leaders isolate followers emotionally before controlling them physically, cutting off calm voices, heightening fear, amplifying attachment. Emotion creates urgency. Urgency eliminates scrutiny. Look at the modern world and the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Outrage culture thrives on this exploit. Headlines are engineered to provoke, not inform. Social platforms reward anger with visibility. The more emotional the reaction, the wider the reach. Calm voices are drowned out, nuance is punished, and in the noise, manipulation becomes effortless. This is why Machiavelli viewed emotional detachment not as coldness, but as survival. Detachment does not mean you feel nothing. It means you are not owned by what you feel. The emotionally detached individual still experiences fear, but does not obey it. Still feels anger, but does not act on command. Still desires, but does not surrender judgment. This distinction is critical because emotional attachment creates leverage. What you are afraid to lose can be used against you. What you crave can be dangled in front of you. What enrages you can be activated on demand. The moment someone can predict your emotional reactions, they can predict your behavior, and predictability is the opposite of power. This is why the most dangerous individuals in any system are not the angriest, but the calmest, not the loudest, but the most composed. They observe while others erupt. They wait while others rush. They decide while others react. Neuroscience calls this emotional regulation. Stoics called it inner freedom. Machiavelli saw it as strategic advantage. When a leader remains calm in chaos, people follow. When a negotiator shows no desperation, terms improve. When an individual does not react to provocation, aggressors lose momentum. Detachment collapses manipulation because it removes urgency. This does not make you cruel, it makes you clear. Clarity under pressure is rare, and rarity commands respect. The uncomfortable truth is this: most people believe their emotions make them authentic. But authenticity without control is exposure. It tells the world exactly where to push, exactly when to provoke, exactly how to steer you. Your strongest emotions are not proof of strength, they are points of entry. This is the dividing line Machiavelli recognized, the line between those who shape events and those who are shaped by them. On one side are the actors, on the other, the puppets. The actors feel emotion, but do not kneel to it. The puppets mistake emotional intensity for conviction. Detachment is not about becoming less human. It is about becoming less controllable. And in a world that profits from your reactions, that may be the most ruthless form of power there is. Lesson IV: never reveal your full intentions. The most dangerous information is not what others hide from you, it's what you volunteer too early. Every time someone reveals their plans, their desires, their next move, they believe they are building trust. But Machiavelli saw something colder beneath that instinct. Transparency often serves the observer, not the speaker, because once your intentions are known, they are no longer yours. They become variables in someone else's strategy. Espionage history is built on this principle. Spies rarely succeed through lies alone, they succeed through withholding. By offering fragments instead of the whole picture, by letting others assume they understand when they don't. Machiavelli warned rulers that those who reveal their full intentions invite interference. Allies become competitors, supporters become obstacles, and enemies, once blind, begin to prepare. Information creates asymmetry, and asymmetry creates power. Modern negotiation psychology confirms this. The person who speaks first reveals more, or explains too much, often loses leverage. Not because they are wrong, but because they have reduced uncertainty. And uncertainty is uncomfortable, but it is also useful. When others don't fully understand your motives, they speculate. And speculation is work they do for you. They fill the gaps with their own fears, hopes, and assumptions. They adjust their behavior preemptively. They reveal priorities without you asking a single question. This is why silence is not emptiness. It is pressure. Machiavelli understood that people are far more vulnerable when they believe they are close to understanding you, but never quite certain. Mystery keeps attention locked. Predictability releases it. Look at corporate politics. The employee who openly shares their ambition becomes a threat. The one who explains every move invites scrutiny. But the individual who moves quietly, who speaks selectively, who reveals outcomes instead of intentions, advances without resistance. In social dynamics, oversharing is often mistaken for authenticity, but those who broadcast their plans, their emotions, their grievances expose themselves to manipulation and betrayal. Information spreads, context disappears, and what was once private becomes currency. Online, this accelerates. Social media rewards disclosure, but punishes vulnerability. Every opinion becomes searchable. Every intention becomes archived. And once released, information cannot be retrieved, only repurposed. Machiavelli warned that what is known can be exploited, not always maliciously, sometimes simply opportunistically. This lesson is often misunderstood as a call for deception. It is not. It is a lesson in timing. Secrecy is not about hiding forever. It is about revealing when it no longer weakens you. The wise strategist does not lie unnecessarily. They simply do not rush to speak. They understand that silence preserves flexibility, that plans evolve, that premature disclosure locks you into paths others can sabotage. In negotiation, revealing your bottom line too early guarantees you'll be pushed toward it. In relationships, exposing every vulnerability before trust is earned creates imbalance. In leadership, announcing intentions before securing power invites rebellion. Opacity is not manipulation, it is self-defense. And there is a psychological effect here that Machiavelli understood intuitively. Humans are drawn to mystery. What is fully understood is quickly dismissed. What remains partially hidden becomes fascinating. People lean in. They watch closely. They invest attention. Mystery does not repel people. It pulls them closer. This is why the most influential figures often say less than expected. Why the most powerful negotiators pause instead of explain. Why those who control information control outcomes. Silence forces others to reveal themselves. They speak to fill the void. They negotiate against imagined positions. They expose intentions you never asked for. And all the while, you remain uncommitted. This is not about becoming distant or cold. It is about resisting the impulse to perform clarity for others' comfort. Because comfort weakens leverage. Machiavelli knew this impulse well. He saw leaders destroyed not by enemies, but by their own openness, their need to be understood, their desire to appear honest before securing safety. The ruthless truth is this: once your intentions are known, they are no longer weapons, they are targets. So choose silence not as absence, but as strategy. Reveal not to be seen but to move. Because in a world obsessed with disclosure, the rarest form of power is restraint, and mystery, when used wisely, is not a wall. It is an invitation. Lesson V7: use morality as a tool, not a cage. Every civilization teaches the same comforting story, that good intentions lead to good outcomes, that moral purity protects the righteous, that being virtuous is enough. Machiavelli shattered this illusion, not because he hated morality, but because he saw how often it failed the people who trusted it blindly. This lesson is the most dangerous one to misunderstand and the most necessary to confront, because the world does not collapse moral dilemmas into clean choices. Power operates in gray zones, places where every option carries cost, and inaction is often the most destructive choice of all. History is filled with leaders who were personally moral and catastrophically ineffective, rulers who refused to act decisively to avoid bloodshed, and allowed far greater violence to unfold, commanders who clung to ideals of fairness and lost entire nations to those with fewer scruples, institutions that prioritized appearing ethical while quietly enabling injustice through passivity. Machiavelli observed this pattern relentlessly. He noticed that rigid morality often becomes a cage, trapping leaders inside principles that reality does not respect. While they hesitate, others move. While they debate purity, others shape outcomes, and the innocent pay the price. This is not an argument for cruelty. It is an argument against naivety. Moral absolutism assumes a fair playing field, but power dynamics are never fair. They are asymmetrical, competitive, and often ruthless. In such environments, ethics that refuse to adapt do not restrain evil, they empower it. Modern psychology calls this moral licensing and virtue signaling. When people focus more on appearing good than doing good, ethics becomes performance, a shield for self-image, not a guide for action. Machiavelli saw this centuries earlier. He warned that those who insist on moral purity in immoral systems are often exploited by those who understand the system better. The appearance of virtue becomes predictable, and predictability, as we've learned, is weakness. This does not mean morality is irrelevant. It means morality must be strategic. Consider ethical paradoxes that still haunt us today. Is it immoral to lie if the truth causes harm? Is it unethical to use force to prevent greater violence? Is restraint virtuous if it allows injustice to spread? These are not hypothetical questions. They shape wars, policies, and lives. Machiavelli believed leaders must judge actions by their consequences, not their labels. Because history remembers outcomes, not intentions. The dead are not comforted by the purity of the choices that failed them. Yet here is where his philosophy is often distorted. Machiavelli did not advocate for evil. He warned against performative goodness. There is a difference between ethics and exhibition. True responsibility means accepting moral burden, not avoiding it. It means making difficult choices and owning their consequences, rather than hiding behind ideals while others suffer. In modern leadership, this tension is everywhere. Corporations announce values while exploiting loopholes. Governments preach justice while avoiding decisive action. Individuals broadcast moral outrage while doing nothing that risks personal cost. Morality becomes a brand, a signal, a costume. And Machiavelli would argue that this kind of morality is worse than useless. It is dangerous, because it creates the illusion of righteousness without accountability. Pragmatic ethics, on the other hand, asks harder questions. Not, does this make me look good? But, does this reduce harm? Not, is this pure? But, is this responsible? This framework is uncomfortable because it removes the safety of absolutes. It forces individuals and leaders to think, to weigh consequences, to anticipate outcomes, to accept moral complexity, and complexity is frightening. It is far easier to cling to rigid rules than to navigate uncertainty. But power does not reward comfort. It rewards clarity under ambiguity. Machiavelli understood that ethics without strategy produces victims, people who suffer not because they are wrong, but because they are unprepared. At the same time, he recognized that strategy without ethics produces monsters, unchecked, corrosive, and ultimately self-destructive. This is the balance. Power must be constrained by responsibility, but responsibility must be guided by realism. The question is not whether morality matters. It is how it is applied. Is being good always the same as doing good? That question has no easy answer, and anyone who claims otherwise is selling certainty where none exists. Machiavelli forces us to confront this discomfort, not to abandon ethics, but to mature them, to move beyond slogans and into consequences, beyond appearances and into impact. The warning he leaves us with is sharp and impossible to ignore. Power without ethics creates monsters, but ethics without strategy creates victims, and the world is already full of both. Lesson VI: make yourself necessary, not love. It fades, it shifts, it disappears the moment circumstances change. Necessity does not. Machiavelli understood a truth that most people resist their entire lives. Likability is unstable, but usefulness is durable. You can be admired and still discarded, celebrated and still replaced, loved and abandoned the moment you no longer serve a purpose. Power does not cling to affection. It anchors itself to dependence. History makes this painfully clear. The most powerful figures behind thrones were rarely loved. They were tolerated, protected, preserved, not because they were kind, but because removing them would collapse the system itself. Advisors, strategists, treasurers, architects of bureaucracy, men whose absence would create chaos. Machiavelli advised rulers not to seek love from those they governed. Love is conditional. It belongs to the people, and people are fickle. Instead, he argued that stability comes from being needed, because people may turn on what they resent, but they hesitate to destroy what they rely on. Psychology supports this relentlessly. Humans instinctively protect what sustains them. We may criticize it, even hate it, but dependency requires loyalty. When someone or something becomes essential to our survival, comfort, or success, we rationalize its presence, even its flaws. This is why emotional bonds fade, but utility endures. Friendships dissolve, relationships drift, admiration cools. But the person who solves problems, provides access, maintains systems, that person is shielded. In modern workplaces, this lesson plays out daily. The most popular employee is often the first to be laid off. The indispensable one, the individual who understands the systems, the processes, the institutional memory, survives, restructures, leadership changes, and crises. They may not be celebrated, but they are protected, because removing them creates cost. Machiavelli reframed loyalty not as an emotional contract, but as a structural one. People are loyal to what makes their lives easier, safer, or more predictable. When you become embedded in that equation, influence follows naturally, without demands, without performances. Social hierarchies function the same way. Those who chase approval exhaust themselves trying to please. They adapt constantly. They dilute their value. But those who cultivate rarity, skills, insights, access, do not need to beg for acceptance. They are invited. This is not about manipulation. It is about positioning. Making yourself necessary does not mean exploiting others. It means understanding where value truly lies. It means contributing in ways that cannot be easily replicated. It means solving problems others avoid, quietly, consistently, without spectacle. Machiavelli warned rulers against surrounding themselves with loved men instead of capable ones. Affection blinds judgment. Dependence clarifies it. In relationships, this lesson is uncomfortable, but real. People say they want honesty, loyalty, love, but behavior reveals something else. They gravitate toward those who stabilize their world, who bring clarity in chaos, who provide something irreplaceable, emotional, intellectual, practical. Admiration may flatter the ego. Necessity shapes behavior, And here lies the darker insight. When you are loved, you are at the mercy of mood. When you are needed, you are insulated from it. This is why institutions protect contributors, not critics. Why systems resist removing key operators even when they are unpopular. Why power structures preserve utility over virtue. Machiavelli did not romanticize this. He observed it. He knew that those who rely on affection misunderstand human nature. People praise in abundance, but sacrifice reluctantly. They defend what sustains them, not what inspires them. This lesson does not ask you to become cold or transactional. It asks you to be realistic, to stop confusing approval with security, to stop chasing love as protection, to understand that influence grows from contribution, not applause. The most powerful leverage is silent. It does not announce itself. It does not demand loyalty. It simply makes absence costly. And when absence is costly, presence becomes power. Machiavelli's insight leaves us with a sobering truth, one that cuts against everything we're taught to desire. People may admire you. They may praise you. They may even love you. But they protect what they need. And in the architecture of power, protection is everything. Lesson V: focus on outcomes, not applause. Applause is seductive. It sounds like progress. It feels like victory. But most of the time, it means nothing. Machiavelli understood a truth that modern culture desperately tries to forget. History does not reward those who were admired. It rewards those who were effective. Crowds cheer intentions. Power respects outcomes. This is where many intelligent, well-meaning people fail. They become addicted to validation, to being seen as right, moral, enlightened, or on the correct side of history. And in doing so, they trade results for recognition, because applause feels like movement, even when nothing actually changes. Machiavelli watched leaders fall into this trap centuries ago. Rulers who sought approval delayed decisions. Commanders who feared criticism hesitated. Reformers who needed public praise softened their actions until their efforts became symbolic instead of transformative. And symbols do not move reality. Modern society has perfected this illusion. Activism often prioritizes visibility over impact. Corporations celebrate values while quietly preserving systems that benefit them. Online discourse rewards clever arguments, moral superiority, and viral outrage, not solutions. Performance replaces progress. Psychologically, this makes sense. Validation triggers dopamine. Being praised feels safer than being effective. Outcomes are uncertain. They require sacrifice, conflict, and risk. Applause offers immediate comfort without consequence. But Machiavelli would argue that comfort is the enemy of power. Outcome-focused thinking is uncomfortable by nature. It asks brutal questions. Did this actually work? Did anything change? Or did it just look impressive? Winners ask these questions relentlessly, and that is why they are often misunderstood or disliked. Because focusing on outcomes is lonely. There is no audience for quiet effectiveness, no applause for decisions made in silence, no praise for strategies that prevent disasters no one ever sees. The crowd only notices failure or spectacle. This is why many leaders prioritize appearing active over being effective, announcements over execution, statements over results. They confuse noise with influence. Machiavelli warned against this illusion. He observed that those obsessed with reputation often sacrifice leverage. They explain themselves when silence would work better. They defend decisions instead of securing outcomes. They argue publicly while losing strategically. Being right feels good. Winning feels different. History is ruthless in its accounting. It does not remember who had the best arguments. It remembers who reshaped reality. Those who ended wars are remembered, not those who protested longest. Those who built systems endure, not those who critiqued them most eloquently. Those who seized moments are recorded, not those who waited for approval. Outcome-focused individuals accept something most people cannot. Being misunderstood is often the cost of effectiveness. They move before consensus forms. They act while others debate. They accept criticism as collateral. This does not make them careless. It makes them disciplined. They measure success not by praise, but by consequences. Not by visibility, but by permanence. Not by how something feels, but by what it produces. Machiavelli did not dismiss morality or intelligence. He dismissed performative morality and performative intelligence, the kind that exists to be seen rather than to function. He understood that applause is often a signal that you are aligned with the crowd, not that you are correct. Crowds celebrate what confirms them. Power rewards what changes them. This lesson forces an uncomfortable choice. Do you want to be praised or effective? Do you want recognition now or impact later? Because these paths rarely overlap. Those who chase validation become predictable. They adjust themselves to feedback. They soften edges. They abandon hard truths for acceptance. And slowly, without realizing it, they surrender agency. Those who focus on outcomes accept isolation. They become resistant to noise. They stop explaining themselves unnecessarily, and in that silence, they gain clarity. Machiavelli's insight cuts cleanly through centuries of illusion. Intentions are invisible to history. Effort is forgotten. Struggle is irrelevant. And the final reframing is as cold as it is true. History remembers outcomes, not applause, not intentions, just results. Lesson V. The most dangerous person is the one who understands human nature. There is a mistake people make when they hear the word dangerous. They imagine violence, aggression, chaos. But Machiavelli understood something far more unsettling. The most dangerous people are not those who destroy, but those who cannot be controlled. Throughout this documentary, you've encountered ideas that feel sharp, uncomfortable, even unsettling. Not because they are cruel, but because they strip away comforting illusions. Illusions about fairness, illusions about morality, illusions about how power truly moves through the world. This final lesson is not a new strategy. It is the synthesis of everything you've seen. Because mental lethality is not about domination. It is about immunity. Manipulation exists whether you acknowledge it or not. Power games are played whether you participate or not. Narratives are shaped whether you speak or remain silent. And ignorance does not equal innocence. It only makes you easier to move. Machiavelli is often misunderstood because people expect philosophers to tell them how the world should be, not how it is. But Machiavelli did not offer comfort. He offered clarity. He did not invent cruelty. He documented patterns, patterns of envy, patterns of fear, patterns of ambition, betrayal, loyalty, and collapse. He observed that humans are not guided primarily by logic or morality, but by emotion, perception, and self-interest. And once you understand this, the world begins to look different, not darker, sharper. You start to notice how outrage is manufactured, how heroes are elevated, then sacrificed, how morality is weaponized, not protected, how people demand transparency from the powerless and secrecy from the powerful, and most importantly, how those who understand these dynamics rarely announce it, because awareness itself is leverage. The previous lessons were not about becoming manipulative. They were about becoming unmanipulable. Appearing weak when strong protects you from envy. Controlling narratives shields you from distortion. Emotional detachment keeps you from being exploited. Strategic silence preserves your leverage. Pragmatic ethics prevent you from becoming a victim of rigid idealism. Indispensability creates protection where likability fails. Outcome focus keeps you from drowning in applause and illusion. Taken together, they form something dangerous, not to others, but to systems that rely on your blindness. A person who understands human nature cannot be easily provoked, cannot be easily divided, cannot be easily reduced to a caricature. They see patterns instead of personalities, structures instead of scandals, incentives instead of excuses. This is why true power is quiet. The loudest voices are often the most predictable. The angriest crowds are often the easiest to steer. The most confident moralists are often the most controllable, because certainty creates rigidity, and rigidity breaks. Machiavelli's greatest warning was not about rulers, it was about citizens, about individuals who mistake moral purity for protection, about those who believe good intentions will shield them from predatory systems. They won't. Understanding human nature does not make you cynical. It makes you precise. It allows you to choose when to engage and when to withdraw, when to speak and when silence is stronger, when to trust and when trust must be earned, not assumed. This understanding creates a quiet freedom, freedom from outrage cycles, freedom from manufactured guilt, freedom from narratives designed to turn you into a pawn. And here is the paradox Machiavelli forces us to confront. The more you understand how manipulation works, the less you need to manipulate anyone. Because your power comes from clarity, not control, you stop reacting, you stop performing, you stop chasing approval from systems that benefit from your confusion. You become strategically calm, and that calm is deeply unsettling to a world that runs on emotional volatility. This is why the most dangerous person is not the loud revolutionary or the ruthless tyrant. It is the individual who understands the game and refuses to play it blindly. Not to dominate, not to deceive, but to remain free. Machiavelli was not a teacher of cruelty. He was a mirror. And now, that mirror has been held up to you. So the final question lingers, quietly, uncomfortably. Now that you see the game, will you keep pretending it isn't real? Or will you move through the world with eyes open, strategic, aware, and impossible to manipulate? Because once you understand human nature, you are no longer harmless. You are immune, and that changes everything.